Okay, so I am very excited to start this video off. My name's host Eric, host Talking with Famous People, and Akira is trying to run a grammar K on me and explain why my position on normative stuff and descriptive and predictive stuff is wrong. And I'll explain why he's wrong. Hami's determined to get me at some point. He's going to get me. He's determined. And you will. I don't doubt you will, Hami, at some point. Not today, though. Here's what he says. The difference between an is statement and an ought statement is as follows. An is statement is a statement about what is the case, such as the proposition dogs are animals. An ought statement is a statement about what should or ought to be the case, such as the proposition all dogs ought to be happy. One cannot infer an ought from an is, since there is nothing within a descriptive statement about how things are that entails a normative statement about how things ought to be. One cannot infer from the is that petting makes dogs happy, the ought that one ought to pet dogs. This argument contains an implicit ought that people ought to maximize happiness, and is only a valid argument if this ought is true. Instances in which people infer an ought from an is therefore contain an implicit ought which the arguer is not making explicit. One cannot infer an ought from an is, but one can infer an ought from an is and an ought. Okay, well, you've got a number of problems here. First of all, you're failing to distinguish between normative statements that are prescriptive and normative statements that are descriptive. And normative statements that are descriptive of actions, not states of being. So the first problem you have here is you say, you use it as an example of a normative statement, dogs ought to be happy. But that's not a meaningful statement in any sense of the word. Okay, so that's not even a normative statement. It's a false claim. It's a category error. That's what it is. Category error. It assumes that a state of being ought to be something other than it is, which is to make a category error, because a state of being is not an agent that can take action. Okay, so right there, the whole argument you gave me just falls apart completely, because you're failing to make that distinction. So that's your number one problem. That we can already the whole flow is empty now. There's nothing standing left, because everything's predicated on this notion that you're accurately describing what a normative statement is. But you're not. So you got a problem there. A normative statement that's actually prescriptive is going to be one that indicates an agent ought to take an action. Okay. So now you might still say that an ought statement is a statement about what should or ought to be the case, but it's not. Okay, so we've already established that. It can be to say, like, something is more consistent with justice than something else. You can have that kind of a statement that requires, of course, you to define those terms. But normally a normative statement requires an agent performing action for it to be meaningful. So that means a just government ought to do something. That's the least agent specificity you could possibly have and still have a meaningful statement, right? So, okay, now that we've eliminated that part, let's go on. One cannot infer an ought from an is, since there is nothing within a descriptive statement about how things are that entails a normative statement about how things ought to be. So what you're saying is, you're pointing out that in every philosophical discussion, you need to have both a value and a value criterion. You've discovered something here. You've discovered the reality of Lincoln-Douglas debate. Congratulations. Yeah, we do need to have a shared value in order for the value criterion to meaningfully be upholding something. That's true. But that doesn't undermine anything I'm saying at all. Yeah, I am appealing to a shared value of a shared good, a common good that we can refer to. A common good being one of universality and reciprocal burdens, not being of utilitarian goods, right? The reciprocal burdens thing being, for us to even have this discussion, we have to both start initially to say, yes, we agree to reciprocal burdens. That if I'm going to make this kind of argument, you get to make that kind of argument. If this is going to have impact, that's going to have impact. So what I'm saying is that's the universality, right? That's the normative obligation, is to understand things in terms of universality and reciprocal burdens. If you're being unfair, it means you're using arguments that you're saying, I get to use these and get the impacts, but you don't get to use the same kind of arguments and get those impacts, because if you do, then I'll lose, and I don't like that. So my basic moral claims have to do with reciprocal burdens more than anything else. I'm saying to understand the world through any other mechanism is to embrace a fundamental unfairness according to our shared value of a good. We know we share this value of a good because you expect your sentences to have meaning. You expect them to have meaning, and you expect when they're right and have good reasons behind them for me to respond to those specific reasons. You expect me to not just say, oh, Hami, you're being silly, I'm not going to answer any of that garbage. You expect me to actually read it and to answer it, right? That means you're already agreeing to a world of reciprocal burdens. You're saying, to fairly adjudicate this particular point, we need to argue with logic. Well, again, you're not distinguishing between the value and the value criterion. I agree that our normative discussions about what one ought to do presuppose a shared value. And we may be having difficulty defining exactly what that shared value is. What we call it is the good. And we know that it doesn't involve slaughtering toddlers for no good reason. We know that we can agree on certain specifics. We can agree on a general framing of it. And then our job, what we're actually doing here, is trying to figure out the specifics of it. I'm telling you, these specifics of upholding this shared value are a better way to do it. And here's why. And here's why we should prefer reciprocal burdens as a mechanism of understanding that over some descriptive analysis of perceived unfairness. That reciprocal burdens is a better way to do that. Because reciprocal burdens is the only way that we don't actually maximize unfairness. That I'm winning both on the utilitarian grounds and on deontological grounds. That we have a clear binary choice here, and we can function as moral agents as though there were a clear line of moral prohibition, and that we have good cause to believe there is. That to believe otherwise is inconsistent with our own behavior and reality. That to believe otherwise necessitates that we acknowledge this bad and awful thing is okay and that bad and awful thing is okay. And that to the extent that there seems to be violations in that principle, that it's a matter of you're going the wrong direction in responding to it, which is make sure that those rights violations, quote unquote, are local, and make sure there are, to the extent that it's possible, some consensual elements to it. If I move to a community and I'm aware ahead of time that there's going to be limitations in my access to my ability to use the property, when I buy a piece of property and I know it's zoned residential, I shouldn't complain when I then can't build my factory there. So, I mean, are there real world issues that come into play that complicate the matter? Of course. Do they undermine the fundamental correctness of the system and the principalist approach? Not at all. Not in the way I've got it, not the architecture I've got anyway. So I think the problem here is you want it to be inferentially necessary that there be a good before we argue at all about how to understand what that good is, or how to how to develop, make, or otherwise encourage a framework that allows us to evaluate situations on moral grounds in a consistent and fair way. Self-ownership and private property rights are therefore a normative claim that a person ought to have their own body as property, and in virtue of this ownership have exclusive rights of control and use over their body. I think you only say it's a normative claim insofar as you're not addressing the alternative to it. You're not saying what the alternative to self-ownership is. You're trying to isolate the issue of self-ownership and private property as though it didn't have to be understood through its alternative. But instead of arguing against self-ownership and private property, tell me what you're arguing in favor of. If I don't own myself, who does? Am I not responsible for my actions then, since I don't own myself? You say it's a normative claim, that people should be perceived as owning themselves. I'm saying it's a descriptive claim. People are treated as though they own themselves. They're accountable for their own behaviors. I'm not the property of Joe, so I can't say, well, I know I'm the one who robbed the store, but Joe should be blamed because I belong to him. So, I mean, descriptively, well, okay. I'm not saying people are entirely accountable for their actions. I'm saying we much more behave as though people own themselves than we behave as though they don't. Which is to say, your point that it's only a normative claim, no, it's inductively true as well as deductively obvious. It's deductively obvious from the fact that if not A, then what? If not self-ownership, then what? If not private property, which is to say, my labor gives me claim to something, then what? Is it unfair? Are we agreed on a values level that it's unfair for a farmer to spend 6 months growing wheat only to have the guy with the bigger guns come over and steal all his wheat? Do we agree that's unfair? Do we agree that he has claim to say that he's had injustice perpetrated against him? Or not? If you want to attack property rights, all you have to do is say, I like it when might makes right. I want the person who's most violent to get all the stuff. That's fine. Then you want to say that. Then okay, you're expressing an actual position. If you're just saying, here's what's wrong with property rights as a reality, because I'm making a descriptive claim, I'm making a normative claim, I'm making a prescriptive claim, and I'm making a predictive claim. All those claims, I'm making them all about property rights. You don't know what you're talking about because you say I would be in favor of left libertarianism. What you're really saying is I don't like the fact that there's not the outcomes I want to see. So we're going to ignore the principles to justify some violence against some people for some reasons. But the problem with that is, somebody else has different reasons. Hami, somebody else has different reasons. You think it's okay to force because of this. Somebody else thinks it's okay to force because of this. Somebody else thinks it's okay to force because of this. The only thing it's okay to force because of are things where it ties in with the whole framework. It makes sense from a limiting perspective, and it's logically consistent, and it prioritizes the reduction of coercion as a matter of course. It doesn't justify for utilitarian reasons. It justifies when things are consistent with the system. It's important. It matters, right? Because otherwise, when you say, okay, you know what, Hami, I trust you. You do the coercion. I trust it. That's fine. I know you're going to make good decisions. Then the person I hate who makes all the really fucking terrible decisions also gets to do that. That's the problem you have. You don't get to be in power. That's the problem you have. When you want to afford more power to a state apparatus, you don't get to be in power. You have to think about it from your worst enemy having that power, not you having that power. You can't assume the state's going to produce the outcomes you like with your left libertarianism. It'll be more of the same. See, yet another wrong person, their wrongness proved wrong. Well, that's why we need my wrongness, which prevents everybody else's wrongness from, including my own, from impacting people, right? As I've said before, you can't juggle between, we can't just keep switching out bad idea after bad idea, saying, well, maybe this person's fucking bad idea is worth coercing people over. Maybe this person's bad idea is worth coercing people over. We're looking for justifications for coercion. It's always going to be a bad idea. We should be looking for ways to eliminate it. I mean, I don't think anybody spits a rule over me. That's the problem. You might think that, well, but see, Eric, I think, well, I'm not saying you're not fit, Eric. Maybe you'd be fit to rule, or maybe I don't think I would be. I don't know. But let's say you did think that. I'd say, well, Okay, fine, but I don't want more power so that I can make good changes, because I know that more power means other people have more power to make bad changes. I want less power. I want less power for everybody. Less coercion, less violence. I want to prevent certain people from ruling over others. We don't need rulers, for God's sake. I mean, what do you want, a king or something? Like, you are my subject, Akira. I am your ruler, your lord and master, King Eric. That's ridiculous. The whole idea of ruling is ridiculous. It's just some dude, right? Whoever you think is fit to rule you is just some fucking random dude. But, okay, but when you say that, Akira, you say, I think certain other people should be afforded more power over others. I think you need to remember, when you say that, imagine the people you least want to be afforded more power are the ones who actually get it. Because that's how it works out. It doesn't work out the way you want. You say, well, we have to have somebody making decisions because so many people are unfit to rule themselves. It's the most unfit ones who will rule you if you embrace that model. As we see, you're embracing that model that's produced Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. You're saying there are people who are unfit to rule themselves. So let's have them rule me instead. That's what happens when we support state apparati. Right. Even if you get the one you want, they'll disappoint you. They'll prove to be more of the same fucking bullshit. Why? Because the state apparati are fundamentally broken. They're not constrained by the limiting principle. I want to make this democracy something people can believe in again. I want to run for president. I want to constrain this government. I want to constrain the federal government to the best of my ability. I want to change the conversation so that we're talking about it properly. People have internalized so many of the lies of the state that they fight hard. They fight hard in defense of coercive mechanisms that are unjustified by any reasonable claim to righteousness. And I stand against such violence. And as President of the United States, I will sign no legislation that involves coercion against individuals, except insofar as the net deal of that package reduces total coercion against individuals in this country. So, anyway, that's what happens when I become president. Hami, now you're just pushing my buttons for no good reason. The state itself is a natural outgrowth of coercive capitalist what? That's nonsense. The state is not an outgrowth of coercive capitalist anything. Capitalism is not inherently coercive at all. By definition, it's non-coercive. It's consensual. You can't just conflate two words like coercive and consensual. They're the exact opposite, right? I mean, there's nothing coercive about capitalism. The whole engine of capitalism is consent. People choosing to buy something. People offering to sell something. Okay, so I'm out of cigarettes. And you know what that means? It means we are done for the evening. Hami, I very much appreciate your pushing me hard intellectually, consistently on these points, forcing me to make sure my own perspectives are clean, consistent, stand-up scrutiny, stuff like that. So everybody have a good evening. Thank you very much for watching Talking with Famous People. Don't forget to eat plenty of cheese. And if you reach for the stars, you'll fall into the clouds. That's what they say.